Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Caught on the Mic. I am Michael Clark. In this episode, I welcome singer, songwriter, musician Suzanna Choffel. Suzanna's based out of Austin, Texas. She was a contestant on season 3 of The Voice alongside Melanie Martinez and Cassadee. She has brushed shoulders with some really cool people, including Macklemore. And in this episode, we get to talk about her career. We wax a little bit about 90s music and how it influenced the melting pot that both her and I shared through our musical journeys. This is a fantastic episode. I want you to check it out as soon as possible. As always, listener and viewer discretion is advised. Suzanna Choffel joins me today on Caught on the Mic. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had a little bit of a layoff, I would say about 3 weeks, but I am back, and this is an exciting episode. I am speaking with Suzanna Choffel. She is from Austin, Texas. She has just released an amazing album in September called Bird by Bird. Suzanna, how the heck are you?
Thanks for having me. I am doing great. It's a gorgeous day here in Austin, Texas. The weather is lovely, and so I'm in a good mood. I'm in a good place. Yes, it's golden
Good.
hour here, so it's the golden light is like spilling into my studio, and so it's creating a nice vibe.
Oh,
You
I
look like
love
you're in
that.
a cave. You're like in a vampire cave.
It's kind of it's got a little bit of everything from Randy Macho Man Savage to the
I
Misfits and
love it.
everything in between, but
I love it.
it's a reflection of who I am. I love the fact that because I was scrolling through your social media today,
Yeah.
that you are taking such a positive outlook on life right now,
Yeah.
because it does feel like the world is closing in around
It
everybody.
does. It does.
Social and socio-political unrest. Usually, I'm hands off on that type of stuff,
Yeah.
but for me personally, I believe wholeheartedly in creating positive content and positive dialogue, no
Absolutely.
matter where anybody comes from, what their socio-political status is, and what have you. So, when I see somebody else creating positive output, I tend to gravitate to them quite a bit.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like, it's just yeah, it is just a crazy intense time in the world. It has been for some time and doesn't feel like it's like not slowing down. It's just things are just getting more and more intense. And so I feel like the only, we have so little control over a lot of what happens in the larger sphere of political, obviously you can do your part, you can vote, you can show up, but there's so much you
Mm.
can't control, and what I'm really trying to, like, just keep remembering is that just focus on the things you can control, try to make the world a better place in your,
Yes.
little universe, however small or big it is, and hopefully your good energy and love will be contagious and spread to other people and will positively impact them, so
I love that. So, without any further ado, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and let's talk about your origin story and kind of this interesting pathway that you've had into the music industry.
yeah. So I was born and raised here in Austin, Texas, and was, very musical from the beginning of my life. My mom always comments that, she definitely knew I kind of had the music bug. I grew up in a very music loving family. We always had records on, lots of just joyful musical memories. And neither of them were musicians, but they were both like musically inclined. And so I was just I was lucky to be exposed, I think, to a great like record collection and just, they were very supportive. They knew I was, I think I started taking piano lessons when I was like 8 or 9, then slowly gravitated towards guitar when I was about 16 or 17. And once I picked up the guitar, I was like the rest was history. I just like really bonded with that instrument. I still play piano and I love piano, but guitar is kind of my, you know, feels like my soul instrument, and so let's see, kind of the usual in choir, in all the musical things one can be in high school. But I started singing in bands kind of at an early age because Austin has this very unique music community and scene here where they have like teen band opportunities, and there's a lot of like schools here, like rock schools that try to foster that. And so I just happened to know a friend who mentioned it to me. I went and like auditioned for the band, got in. And so by the age of like 14, I was playing in bars and clubs here that wasn't really even allowed to get into. They would have
Right.
these special all ages shows or whatever. And so there was a great early introduction that really sparked like, okay, yes, this is what I want to do.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So went to college. I ended up studying music because I was really intrigued by, really digging into like the theory and the composition and just continuing to kind of expand my musical wheelhouse, or what am I trying to say? My musical knowledge, my musical world to where I went to the school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and it was very eclectic. It had like a world music program, it had contemporary music, it had classical. And so I feel like that was very, very impactful on me. I gravitated toward this kind of Latin Afro-Cuban group that I was in for a while, but I was also in like, writing folk songs on my guitar. And so all of these things that just started I just started soaking them up like a sponge. And I feel like I started to develop what would become kind of my sound, which was sort of slightly percussive guitar playing that was very influenced by reggae and Latin, but vocals that were kind of more influenced by a little bit of blues and jazz and soul. And then, also elements of like folk and rock, and I just loved so many styles. And so I moved back to Austin after college, put a band together, and the rest is history, as they say. Started recording albums and toured, and eventually would end up, doing some reality TV on The Voice. I
Right.
moved to New York for a while, so we can touch on all those things, but that's kind of the timeline. And then ended up moving back from New York to here, and I'm still, just continuing to pursue my career, and ended up having a couple kids along the way too. I think you might have heard them in the background for a minute, but I think their dad simmered them down. So it's the witching hour.
Reading through your bio and listening to your music and this hybrid of sounds that you've brought together, I was thinking about past projects that I've been a part of. And being that we're kind of a similar age and
Yeah.
we spent a good chunk of our teen years in the 90s, and thinking about what music was like, specifically in the second half of the 90s. Do you think the acceptance of blurring genre lines influenced what you were willing to absorb as influences?
I think so. I think there is something interesting about that for sure. I mean, when I think back to the 90s, I mean, God, yeah, there was so much going on. Like, I'll lay out a handful of like concerts I went to, right? Like I went to go see Rage Against the Machine with the Roots opening. I went to go see Sheryl Crow, Elliott Smith, the Pixies. I unfortunately never got to see Nirvana, but like was super into Nirvana,
Right.
and you're right. There was like grunge, hip hop. There was kind of the female introspective singer-songwriter thing happening with like
Hmm.
the Lilith Fair, thing going on. And R&B. I mean, I was super into R&B, Lauryn Hill and Mary J. Blige. And
Right.
it's kind of true. Like there were definitely artists that I would discover later that were outside of that world. Like I would say like a lot of the more global sounds I got
Right.
into were kind of after that, right? And after like my teen years, which I think is probably pretty normal for most people. You're kind of into the pop stuff and the cult, what's being shown on MTV or whatever, from our
Exactly.
time. And then slowly you kind of start to go outside that. But for sure, I think that probably, no one's ever asked that question. I think that's a really great little realization, a little light bulb of the 90s. I don't know about you, but I just feel so lucky. I know everybody probably feels lucky to
Yes.
come up in whatever decade they did in their teens. But I just feel like the 90s were, it was just such this like and it was before social media. So it was like we were being influenced by something other than constantly there was no
Right.
algorithm, pointing us to things, and so just a very different way of experiencing music and pop culture.
Yes, there is a movie that came out, I think, in 1990 or 1991. It had Kiefer Sutherland and Dennis Hopper in it. And it was called Flashback, and it was about this hippie or whatever. Anyways, there's this line where Dennis Hopper looks at Kiefer Sutherland and he says, "The '90s are gonna make the '60s look like the '50s."
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I have spent a number of years thinking, "You know what? I'm never gonna get nostalgic for the '90s like other
Yeah.
people have gotten nostalgic for their
Totally.
generations."
Totally.
And then it just kind of dawned on me as my daughter is doing a, School of Rock type program like you were
Awesome.
talking about,
Oh, that's great.
and now that she's doing it, they're covering '90s songs, and it was like that night nostalgia just came around and punched me in the face. So, I spend a lot of time commiserating with my friends about that decade, and the thing that we've kind of landed on is the '90s was like 3 decades in 1. Like, you can split it up 90 to 93,
It's true.
94 to 97, and then 97 to 2000, and because of how much was happening pop culture-wise, but if you were to throw a blanket over the top of it, it is kind of like the Lollapalooza generation where you could have a bill like my version of Rage Against the Machine and the Roots was Rage Against the Machine and Cypress Hill,
Yep.
you know?
Yep.
You know,
Totally.
where you would combine those people on a bill, or like I grew up in Iowa and I would go see Real Big Fish, Goldfinger, and Slipknot on a bill together
Yes.
when
Right.
Slipknot
Right.
was a local band, and it was really exciting and very influential on me as a musician, almost to a detriment because I know successful people tend to find their niche and stick to it. Where I was very similar to you. I was like, I'm trying to find my own sound based on multiple different influences. And that's something that has really stuck out to me about your music, your 4 albums that are out there. The text in your biography, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so parallel to my musical path because
Yeah.
I've done everything from like rap rock bands to punk rock bands to just the singer-songwriter thing myself, where, all of a sudden I discover Jason Isbell and I think I wanna just write music like him
Right.
all day long,
Right.
so
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think we were very lucky to grow up in that era because there were so many things that were, you know, so many light bulbs going off in our heads, like Beastie Boys and but Fiona Apple, but this and that, and it's just like I think I did just absorb all of it and just I just was like, I just wanna play good music that, like, it has
Mhm.
is interesting and has, something that draws people in, but, like, it's true. It's like you're trying to find your own little special thing, but, the more influences you have. I mean, it's funny, some people are great at, like, just staying in their lane and doing
Mhm.
exactly what they're doing so well, whether it's like a singer-songwriter type thing or Americana or folk or blues. I just and sometimes I wish I could do that because it's so much easier to market
Right.
yourself and to,
Right.
it's been a definitely like a struggle my whole career is like, at bookers asking me or in interviews and journalists like, "What are you? Describe your sound? Like, what genre are you?" And luckily, we've pretty much gotten away from that to some
Yes.
extent, right? It's like now it's like whatever, you can be anything and you can do a million different things, and it does not matter one bit. But still, it is. I sometimes envy my friends who are just like country singer-songwriters or, hip hop artists, it's just easier for them to kind of you can look at them and go, "Oh, this is what they do, this is what they sound like." So,
Yeah, so let's move the clock forward a little bit because, you mentioned some reality TV, you mentioned some reality programming and such that, you have been a part of. You were on season 3 of The Voice, which in my opinion, that season was the season that Cassadee Pope won. That was kind of the season that really broke The Voice,
it did.
in my
Yeah,
opinion,
for sure.
um, because I really thought it was on the bubble before that, but that's
Yeah.
just
Yeah. No, that was a big year for them, and it also broke what's funny about that season too is I feel like so many not just the winner, but there were, like, these other like, I don't know if you remember Melanie
Mhm,
Martinez? Like,
mhm.
she has become huge, like, in a completely different world than Cassidy Pope. She's kind of, like, interesting, weird, artsy pop,
Yes.
right, But she has a cold following.
My daughter has all of her stuff on vinyl.
Oh my god. Well, I was good friends with her on the show. We actually really bonded. She was in her teens. She was so young, and it's
Mhm.
so funny. I felt like the matriarch on the show because I was 32,
Right.
ancient, at least they sort of painted me out to be. And, everyone on the show was kind of in their, early 20s, and there were a lot of teens. And so I sort of took it upon myself to like sort of slightly mentor or just comfort people who are kind of freaking out who are younger. And I'm like, look, this is one little drop in the span of your career. I know this because I have done, not that I had done reality TV before, but I had had lots of opportunities in my career by then to know that like there's not one that's going to be like the life-changing thing. Yes, it'll elevate you and it'll do some good things and open doors, but it's not the be all end all, right?
The thing that I was going to with that was, moving forward beyond the 90s, the 2000s kind of brought forth a different set of opportunities when you consider things like reality programming and social media. Like I'm a big advocate saying that MySpace changed the whole game
Oh yeah.
for how people marketed music moving forward. I run that big theory of mine that I'm sure people look at me with cross eyes about is, a lot of people in the music industry say that pirating is what killed the industry. And my counter to that was, well, maybe not having a streaming model and not embracing it sooner is what killed the
Mhm.
music
Mhm.
industry.
Mhm.
Because a lot of what we were just talking about was the cross pollination of genres. And I think streaming format, the social media format, the YouTubes of the world, and the reality shows of the world have really made that possible because they blurred genre lines to a certain
Yeah.
degree.
For sure. For sure. I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean reality TV I mean it's funny because I was so hesitant to do that show. But they reached out to they do the scouting thing. They do the
Mhm.
open calls, of course, the auditions. I never was gonna do that. I just was like, "I don't know. I just don't feel like I'm for reality TV." But they reached out to my manager and were like, "Hey, would she like to audition?" And I was like, "Well, if I don't have to wait in line and I can just go in and audition, then sure." And I seriously left thinking, "They're never gonna have me. I'm not what they're looking for. I'm not, like, super pop. I'm not super country." And that's what to me was kind of cool about the show is that they wanted different artists. They wanted different sounds and different
Right.
voices. And so even though, in the end they definitely want someone that they can package and market. It is the pop, big music industry. They were open to that and I thought that was kind of cool. And it ended up being, even though it was a weird experience in many ways and reality TV is just strange, they sometimes get you to say things you don't want to and this and that.
Right.
Um, you know, I feel like overall I had a pretty positive experience, and I made a lot of great friends on that show that I'm still friends with to this day. My friend Amanda Brown, who she was in the top 5 or 10 that season too. Just I almost think she should have won. She's just incredible. She's a backup singer for Adele now and has been for
That's awesome.
years, and it's, like, so cool to just, like, see her out with Adele. And anyway, it's neat to keep up with, like, all these super talented musicians who, again, that was just one little thing in their music career, and obviously Cassadee Pope, it did big things for her and Mel Martinez, but, like, for most people, it's just, like, another little, it opened the door to some new fans, some new opportunities.
It is interesting to see how the industry has changed and how people have embraced it and how much it's, you know, evolved. And a lot of naysayers will say that it's gone downhill, but I think there's more art out there now than has ever been out there in history. And and it is because of these platforms for
It
sure.
is, yeah, yeah. No, that is the beauty of it. It is a shame that, like, we haven't quite figured out how to make like the e-commerce, the commerce part of it sort of work in this new way. And we're all kind of adjusting and figuring that aspect out, because of streaming. It's like I see on the socials once a month, I'll see like a musician post their pay stub that they, whatever their earnings from Spotify or from streaming. And it's pretty sad. It's pretty meager. However, it's a platform that helps other people from all over discover you. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing. At the end of the year, they do that whole like Spotify Wrapped or whatever, and you can see all the stats, right, for your music. And I think
Right.
my favorite part about that, it's not like how many streams I got or this and that. It's to see all the different countries all over the world where your music is, where people are listening to you. And I just think that's amazing, because you certainly could not do that in the early aughts or the late '90s because there was no way of unless you had like management and you were touring constantly and you were on radio everywhere, it was really impossible to reach some of these far off places. And now because of the internet and YouTube and streaming and everything, it's pretty incredible, and you're right. I Everybody's making art. In some ways, I feel like it's made people more creative because they know they
Yes.
can. They do have a platform. They do have like a kind of a box to like to put their stuff in and say, "Okay, this is me. This is what I do." And whereas there would have been a lot of more obstacles beforehand, for someone, a kid in Missouri who's just like picked up a guitar and wants to start playing and sharing their songs with the world, well, they can now, which is kinda cool. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely taking the optimistic viewpoint of it, because you could also view it from a pessimistic standpoint and say like, okay, it's easier for people to get dejected because there is so much
It's true.
going on.
It's true.
Like, and there's algorithms now, and if you can't unlock the algorithm, you've already lost before you even entered the race.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
so it is a little tougher in that regard, but it's also encouraging.
Yeah.
I wonder if music, to a certain degree, or the music business hasn't skipped a generation to a certain extent,
Mhm.
because I see in artists right now, I see a lot of really young artists, and then I see people kind of around our age group, and I feel like there's a little bit of a gap in there, and I just wonder
Right.
if that's not due to overstimulation from social media and other things.
It can be extremely overwhelming. I mean, okay, so I just went through the process of releasing a new album, and it was my first one in, like, 7 years, something like that. There was a
Yes.
pandemic, I had a couple kids, it was just like life was happening, and so I was still writing music and I was still playing shows, like, locally and even touring a little bit, but, it takes a lot to make an album, right? To go and, there's the financial aspect, there's just the kinda getting the songs together, there's organizing it, and then there's the releasing it, which is so overwhelming in this new world we're in. It's changed
Right.
tremendously in 7 years. I was, like, shocked. It really brought me down a few times. I definitely had to kinda keep some pep talks going and stay positive because it is a little overwhelming. You put your stuff out there and it feels like a drop in the ocean, right? Because everybody is making music and everybody's putting it out there and we're all, like, competing together. But what
Right.
I have tried to kind of come to, like, a place of sort of peace about is what I think that people need to do, what musicians really should focus on is, yes, put your stuff out there for the world. Try to keep pushing it, right? It'll live out there forever and you'll have some great gains here and there and sometimes people won't respond to it. But just keep working locally too. Like don't forget about your community because your community, like in Austin, we're very lucky. We have an incredibly rich music community here, a tight music community. All of like musicians support each other and go out to see each other's shows and there's just tons of music loving people here,
Right.
patrons who support the arts and like it so I just think that there you kind of it's almost like there's your community, your local scene and then the outside, the bigger world where your music lives. And so you just kind of have to like invest in both of them, but don't get too invested in one if that makes sense or don't
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there are some people who whatever if it makes you happy if like you just want to like play in your local bar and not release music that's totally fine but like I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed with this idea of what success is in the first place and you look at people's streaming numbers and you start comparing and you look at people's followers and there's just so many variables. So I would like, I would tell artists, and I often do, like younger artists, like, don't forget about working your local music community because those are going to be the people that show up for you and support you regardless of how many streams you have on Spotify. So
It's a reciprocal investment. I had somebody tell me at one point in time, if you want people to invest in you, you have to invest in them first. Um, but release strategies are really unusual in this modern
yep.
climate, but they're great that they've adapted so well. I've had several artists on my show that have been in big international touring bands, but now they're kind of like weekend warriors, and they're
Yes.
okay with that. They're like,
Yeah.
we've got an album in the can. We're gonna release one song at a time, like over the next 6 months, and then we'll drop drop it as a full collective. We only do shows like Wednesday through Sunday so we can spend the first half of the week with our families, which is totally different than what it was in the late 90s and the early 2000s, kind of
Yeah,
bringing this full
yeah.
circle.
Yeah. There's
But
and that I think that's really awesome too, is that I think we're also learning as humans that, like, it's not sustainable to do this, like, all or nothing kind of
right,
way, There is sort of a yes and way where it's like, yes, you can play your gigs and you can have a family, right? You can find this kind of nice balance, and it's not gonna be perfect, and maybe you won't be like the rock star that you think you are, that you had the vision
right.
you had in your mind, right? Like when you began. But, there's I don't know if you know Eliza Gilkison. She's a great singer-songwriter here in Austin. She lives in New Mexico now, but she has this beautiful song, "The Beauty Way," and she has it's all about, like, just living the artist way, living the beauty way, and, there's a line in there that says, "The little dream lives, but the big dream dies," and, like, I feel like I've done a little bit of adjusting, like, kind of, doing that the past 10 years, and it's okay. It's like, 1, it's kind of this phase of life, right, that you move into where it's like and your desires change, I don't want to be gone all the time. Maybe if I didn't have kids, yes, that maybe that would
Right.
still be my big dream, right, and I would be working towards it. But I wanted to have kind of both. I wanted to have, like, family life and be a mom, and I also wanna keep writing my songs. It's something that will always be a part of me. My music, I'm just gonna keep doing music. No one can stop me from doing it? So you just kinda have to adjust your expectations a little bit and your ideas of success, but it's great because the good thing about it is when you do reach this age, just like when you reach any age, you have peers and friends around you who are also going through that, and so it's not like you're the only one. You're not, like, in it alone? And so I feel very lucky because there's a lot of great mom musicians here, and we're all very supportive of each other, and we're all just kind of like each other's cheerleaders because we know how hard it is to be a parent and be doing this, just, like many careers. But yeah, anyway, so I think that I try to take a holistic sort of view of career success, ideals these days. So
Let's bring it to the present. You did just drop this fantastic album, Bird by Bird, on September 27th, and it's your first album in 7 years, as you said.
yeah.
Y Songs written during crazy times, including a pandemic and navigating parenthood, as you said.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the architecture of what went into that album.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I if you look at all the songs, I mean, it was funny. Once we finished the record, I kind of looked at the songs and realized I'm like, wow, these are really just like all little slices of life of things I was going through that were so intense that everybody was going through. I started writing the first song for the album was probably my words, and that one was inspired by having a toddler who was walking around babbling all the time and saying adorable things. And I was constantly writing them down or putting them in my notes. And then, kind of one night after she went to bed, I realized I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all of these notes of like her words, but I don't have any new my words, right? I'm a songwriter and yet I haven't been writing. And so it sort of inspired the start, the opening, I would say, of really trying to get back to working on songwriting and the craft. And so there was that. There was, yes, then the pandemic happened. And so some of these songs came from feeling extremely disconnected and feeling that loss of joy and desire in life, and just that lack of human connection. And like the song Missing Out is a lot about just us being on our phones and just constantly staring at the screens instead of staring at each other and looking to each other for connection. And I mean, that's something that it's not like it's gone away since the pandemic
Right.
as the world has opened up. But it was written during that time because I felt it so intensely, and I know a lot of my friends were too. And relationships became tricky and just everything. So that the album's a pretty intense, but also joyful sort of time capsule of this time, this really uh amazing transformative time I was going through of my new identity as a mom now. Bird by Bird, the title track was written, pardon me, for my stepdaughter who I was caring for at the time. She was like 18, 17, 18 around the time that I wrote it. And now she's full on adult and out in the world. but she was really struggling with a lot of, like, mental health issues, as a lot of people were. It was
Yes.
that was, like, I feel like the year that mental health started, like, everyone become started becoming aware of it, and so I sat down and wrote that song one night for her as sort of a mantra, and the irony is that it's kind of been my own personal mantra through the entire process of releasing the album. It's like, "Okay, bird by bird, we'll get through this, right? Like, stone by stone." And it comes from an Anne Lamott book that I was reading at the time, on creative writing, called Bird by Bird. It's the same name. And she shares this great story about, in the introduction, of being at the dinner table growing up when she was a kid, and her brother, her teen brother, had like a bird research project that he had put off and procrastinated until the night before, and so he was sort of having a panic attack and freaking out. And his dad came up and said, "Hey, it's okay. We'll just take it bird by bird." And it's just kind of, yeah, about trying not to get so overwhelmed by every single detail, in life. If you just take things one step at a time, it's like each step then becomes the next step, then becomes the next step. And that's kind of what this album process was like. Once I had these songs, I reached out to my dear friend David Garza, who, I had been just like a huge fan of in the 90s. Talk about the 90s. I feel like he was like, David had a huge album in the 90s and was kind of a rock star. And then we ended up becoming friends through mutual, musician friends in, like, maybe the mid aughts. And I remember he came to one of my shows, and I was just kind of freaked out because he was like my hero and he was there watching. But we ended up becoming fast friends and musical kind of, compadres, and I just love him. And he became a dad like right before we made the album. And so it was really cool because when we went into the studio together, I felt like we were on the same page. It was like he wasn't trying to push me to do crazy stuff, or we weren't doing crazy late nights because we both have kids. And
Oh,
it's just like we understood. We had this mutual understanding of, like, let's just make this beautiful album together, but let's do it in a healthy way. So
right.
it was great. Yeah, it was really lovely to make the album with him while he was in that sweet new spot of fatherhood. And I had kind of come out of those early years, but was really, just so excited to create art again. And I just felt this new kind of fire, in me, which I hadn't felt in a while. It was really nice to kind of feel that spark again.
The craziest thing about coming out of the pandemic, specifically with creatives, is the amount of self-actualization that was the result of it all. Uh, and then to come into parenthood around that same time, I often say to a lot of my friends, and this is going to sound grim, but if you want to learn a lot about yourself, there's two ways to do it. You either become a parent or you become divorced,
Ye
and
Yes, yes.
you learn a lot more about yourself. Now, kind of taking it back to that time, you talked about your stepdaughter, kind of struggling with the mental health aspects of it. I do feel that a huge result of everything we went through during that era is now created this mental health pandemic that we're all becoming more conscious about.
Yeah.
Thank God that
Thank
we're
God.
all a lot
Yes.
more comfortable talking about these
Yeah, we're
things.
able to talk about it, yeah.
I just love the fact that you had this vehicle through this songwriting to where you could put what you were feeling over that period of time down to wax and share it with the world. So since it's been out, what has the reaction of your friends and loved ones been so far?
It's been awesome. Everyone has been so supportive. I had a huge release show here in Austin that was just incredible. We did it at this beautiful historic state theater, and I had this incredible band, and really went big with, like, visuals, and all kinds of cool stuff. So that was an amazing, it felt like sort of the album's coming out party. It was just like,
Right.
ta-da, here it is. And then since then, it's kind of funny. It's like I was so stressed leading up to the release of it, and so anxious, and you just have all these expectations.
Yeah.
And then it was almost like once it was released, I was like, I kind of breathed a big sigh of relief and was like, okay, now people will slowly start to digest it. There's no rush. It's just out there. People will slowly find it. Some quicker than others because they're already fans of mine. Some will come to it slowly. And it's been really awesome kind of organically seeing, every week, like, either a new person coming around to it and leaving me a comment, or purchasing it or something. And, um, And then also like being able to roll out these songs with the band in my shows, because I play out weekly here in Austin. It's been great to get to bring the songs to life every week, and I feel like
Hmm.
the songs are starting to change now, which always happens once you start playing them
Right.
live, as it's like they become sort of different animals and take on different versions, and so that's been fun too, and it's just been great. I got a beautiful local response, which was wonderful, some great local press, and I'm still working on the bigger world as we all are, right? It's like it's been great. I actually have been really enjoying, one thing that has changed a lot since the last time I released an album is now there's so many podcasts like yours,
Right.
and so I've actually done way more podcasts than I have done like, interviews for a publication because like so many publications have folded, and so it's been really great to have these conversations because they're really in depth and it's not just kind of your typical questions during a kind of a, I don't know, an editorial in like a publication. You kind of get to go a little bit deeper and talk about different things, and so that's been really fun too. Is this new podcast world of connecting with different people who are, trying to. I mean, I love that like people like you are just like, I just want to talk to people about everything,
Right.
and let's just hear because I feel like it's so important for people to be able to like put their headphones on and dive into somebody's world, regardless of whether it's music or,
Right.
politics or social justice or all these different facets, medical health stuff. It's pretty amazing that we have this world where we can do that and just almost like be a fly on the wall to a conversation like this,
Right. It's social currency is really
Yeah,
what it is.
yeah,
And like kind of going back to my statement, if you want people to invest in you, you got to invest in them first.
yeah,
And I find like for me as a podcaster, I can't speak on behalf of all podcasters. I can just say how I view it is when somebody does my show, they're giving me the greatest gift you can give another person, and that's time. Because once you
yeah.
give somebody your time, you don't get that back. It's more valuable than money, right?
Absolutely. It's so true. Yeah.
So as a listener, you're kind of gaining that same sense of currency.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people dive into podcasts and dive into YouTube videos more so than they did conventional press like your Spin magazine and your Rolling Stone in the past.
Yeah, and there's also something about hearing, someone's voice, I think, rather than just reading their words. Maybe it's just because
Yes.
I'm an audio person and I just like hearing, the timbre of someone's voice and the laughter, the this and that, like the emotion. And I just think it's been really cool to kind of to be a part of that world. I actually am a radio DJ here in town.
Right.
I'm a DJ on a radio station, so I love talking to people. I love, having conversations, particularly about music. But it's just I really enjoy this. Been enjoying this part of like the album rollout is talking to people. And it's great because everybody always asks you and is curious about something different in your life, and or something, you read the bio, I'm sure like you get the artist info and you kind of start diving in and it's like something sparks in your brain that doesn't spark in someone else's brain, and
Right.
it's great. Like I loved the 90s thing we talked about, that was great. It's like not everybody's gonna bring that up, but everybody hears something different in everyone's story, right? And so that's the beautiful thing about all these different podcasts.
That was one of the things when I decided to move forward with the podcast because of all my time in the music business. I was like, I have all these great connections, but I don't know what I'm gonna do with them because I'm
Yeah,
not gonna
right.
make music anymore.
Yeah.
So it was like, why not have a podcast? And I've got people from all walks of life, all different types of industries. But the big thing that I wanted to prove coming out of the pandemic, because that's when I started my show, was that we actually have more in common than we realize in a world that is constantly trying to divide us.
Yep, it's very
So
true.
your story, Susanna, is just as important to as Brian Austin Green, who I had on my show a couple of weeks ago, or just as important as my next door neighbor if I were to sit down and record a
Yeah,
conversation with him.
right.
And I think again, that's kind of what people gain from listening to podcasts and listening to an artist's story is that sense of sincerity that they can't get anywhere else.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that human connection that, that I mean, that's so often why I go out to hear music in the first place, right? Is to not
Right.
only connect with the band and the music, but there is something about being with all these different people in a room and you don't know anything about them, right? They're all like some of them are strangers, maybe you know some of them. You don't know their political background, their, whatever, all kinds of different preferences and where they come from. But you're all sitting there like enjoying this experience together, and having this shared joy and this, shared sort of cathartic experience. And that is the incredible power of music, that's really hard to get from any other art form really, it's so in the moment, it's just so unifying, so
So we've discussed the past, we've touched on the present. So let's talk about the future. What is next in the pipeline for you?
well, I am trying to looking at next year, I'm trying to book a bunch of different festivals and maybe get like some small, not even really tours per se, but like some weekend dates. I'm trying to get out to LA and New York and do some stuff kind of on the coasts. And I used to go to France a lot and tour there. So there's talk of me
Wow.
going back to France, which would be amazing. I love France. So just kind of trying to now expand, like now that I've kind of, I've released the album, kind of done like the local release. Within the next, 6 months to a year, I'm really trying to get to other places where I do have some fans, where I do have some interest, take it there. And then, I mean, I it's funny. I'm not putting intense pressure on myself to like, write a new album or anything like that. But the cool thing is that this has definitely made me um it's like it's opened that world up again to me of like
Right.
reminding myself I can do this. It's like I've gotten back into the gym, right? And so it's like the muscles have been working. And so I am excited to start creating again. I have this beautiful idea of I really want to do like my next album or project. I want it to be like some duets or some kind of
Sure.
collaborations. Because I haven't done a ton of that. It's funny, I'm not really a big co-writer. I write most of my songs just by myself in my little room. And I'm really trying to kind of, get motivated to do that more. I've had people ask me about that, and I think I've always been so nervous, like, just like, "Wow, what if they don't like my idea? What if" but I've had some great experiences in the last year or 2 where I have sort of done a co-write or done a little bit of that, to where I'm like, "You know what? I should totally try that," because it opens your world up in a certain way. Like, here's the thing, I feel like sometimes if you don't do that, if you get too stuck in your own way, you risk like kind of staying a little too much of the same and going for
Right.
the same tricks that and the same, ideas. And so I really want to challenge myself this next year to collaborate more and do some duets and some co-writing. And so I have lots of fun ideas on the horizon. So yeah.
So with everything that you've learned through your time in the music industry and beyond, what's your advice for making the world a better place tomorrow than what it is today?
Yeah. Well, I will kind of circle back to changing what you can about yourself and in your world to do good. Don't I think it's really easy, especially in this world of social media where we fortunately and unfortunately have access to the horrors of the world, right? And so it's so easy to feel kind of powerless and overwhelmed by it all. So when I get a little too in that headspace, I kind of dial it back and go, okay, what are some things I can do like this week, like kind of like you said, tomorrow, today, right now to make the world a better place? Well, I can take care of myself. I can, put myself in a peaceful mode and try not to judge others and expand my own brain to where I'm not just critically judging everyone right away and going to that ugly place. And I can directly, because I'm a parent, I have the great responsibility of then, kind of putting that on my children or teaching that to my children, or really the best way is to right by example, right? Showing my children. So I would say, just look at some things if you're struggling, if you're feeling down about the world, find something, whether it's writing a song, writing a poem, Cooking. Oh my gosh, I've gotten more into cooking lately, and I find it to be so meditative and therapeutic, and I'm like, "Well, this certainly can't be a bad thing. I'm making my own food, which is going to nourish my body and my family's body, and it's giving me I'm not looking at the news, I'm not looking at my phone. It's a very in the moment present sort of thing." So
Right.
I would say find things like that that you can do that are off social media, off the screen, that take you into yourself and make you feel good, and that in turn will make others feel good around you, it's contagious, right?
I implore everybody to take Susanna's advice and get off your screens and get off the social media every once in a while. But before you do,
Yeah.
Susanna, why don't you tell them where they can all find you online?
Yes, before you do, go give me a follow. I'm just kidding. No, I know. Believe me, the struggle is real, right? And again, it's amazing
Hmm.
because we have all these great podcasts and music and all these things we can do on our phone. So there's so much goodness in it. But yes, just all in moderation. Okay, so I am on socials. Generally, I'm at Suzanna Choffel. My website, SuzannaChoffel.com. And yeah, you can find all of my music streaming. I have a Bandcamp page, and that you can actually purchase like physical like vinyl and t-shirts and
Awesome.
goods that way, which is kind of cool. So if you're kind of more into the physical experience, the new record vinyl is really beautiful and the artwork's beautiful. Yeah, so that's all the things. Susanna Schoffel. Just if you Google me, you'll find me.
Uh, I love it. I have thoroughly enjoyed this
Me
conversation,
too,
and
Michael.
I'm
Thank you so
glad we're
much.
connected now and we're friends. We're following each other on social media. I hope we can do
Absolutely.
this again in the future.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. You were really fun to talk to.
Oh, Susanna, the world's a much better place with you in it, my friend.
Oh, likewise. Feelings mutual.